Apa kabar? Hello again, everyone. This is the Product Uncensored show with Colin Pell. We are at episode 14, and for those of you who've been following us all the way from the start, thank you so much. If any of you, whether you've been following from the first episode or not, have any feedback or if you have any guests you'd like to see on the show, please feel free to send it my way. All interaction is always welcome. Do support the show by liking, subscribing, following. If you're subscribing on YouTube, please also click on the notification bell so you will get instant notifications when new content comes out. We are also available on all major podcasting platforms, so it should be coming out here somewhere. Now, let's talk about today's guest. I'm excited for today's show for a couple of reasons. I think the first one is that it's been a while since we had a female product leader on the show. So I'm really happy that she's able to make it. And by the way, it's not for lack of trying. I have a feeling that, maybe it's my face or something, but I haven't, a few of the female leaders that I've tried to get, have very politely turned me down. So yes, I will keep trying. But yes, we have one more leader on the show today. And secondly, also, because this has been a long time coming, we've tried really hard to get this to finally work. So I'm super excited to have the SVP of Product Management for Gojek on our show. Welcome to the show, Dian, right?
Yes, correct. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So I learned something very new today. So so Ba apparently is how you would refer to someone who's a peer or a friend, I guess. When you for the feminine version to Mas. If you guys are not from Indonesia, go learn some Indonesian slang. It's quite fun. So thank you so much for being on the show, Dian. And also want to thank Gojek as well for allowing her to get on the show. Really had to clear a few hurdles so that we would get this to work. And also Dian is joining us all the way from the US, so it's actually nighttime her time. So super effort on her part. Thank you so much. All right, so Dian, let's start with a little bit about yourself. You are Indonesian.
Yep.
So tell us the story about, where you grew up and how did you end up in the States?
Yeah, of course. Born and raised in Jakarta. So I was there all through high school. I think, I've always wanted to study and live abroad, even as like a young child. So I think eventually, moving somewhere outside of Indonesia to pursue education was a very natural choice for me. I think I applied to like 14 or 15 schools in the US or Canada to make sure, I could like go out there and experience something new. I left for the States after taking a gap year between high school and university. I actually spent some time in China that first year to study Mandarin. And then I moved to the Bay Area for university, and I've been there for almost 15 years now. The years just fly by.
So you're saying that you applied to US and Canada as well. Which was actually your preference, US or Canada? Or you didn't care as long as it's far away?
No, I didn't really care. I think for both, I had family and people I knew there. Both, I think I had more family in Canada, but yeah, no preference.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what you studied in university because it's very interesting, right? You have a Bachelor of Science in Symbolic Systems and Human-Computer Interaction. That sounds like super meta, So tell me more about it.
Oh gosh. Okay. My parents asked me this too. They're like, what are you studying again? I think all parents of these students who end up in this program ask this question. So I think I like to start with just, the name Symbolic Systems. It's a good place to start. And then I can branch out into like what that actually means. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think they chose that name for the program because it's actually quite descriptive, right? Basically, this program studies systems that are built with symbols. So things like natural language programming and computer science, right? Formal logic, right? And then also studies systems that actually work with symbols, like our brains, like computers, like social systems. And so this is a very interdisciplinary program that marries a lot of different disciplines. I think in some other schools it's called cognitive science, which is, I think,
Okay.
easier to understand.
Yes, somewhat.
But yeah, so I think this allows like a lot of room to kind of like, decide where you want to go with that. So for example, right, mine is on computer interaction, human computer interaction, and I went heavy, I think, on like some design thinking and a little bit of computer science. And then you had like much more technical, I think, concentrations like AI, and then you had concentrations like cognitive science, where it was heavier, I think, on psychology and cognitive science and brain science. So yeah, it was a really fun program.
And how did you select that course? Like, did you know about it, or because you saw like Symbolic? Oh, it sounds really cool, and then
Oh
how did
God.
you choose?
I wish I found out about it sooner. So at Stanford, actually, they don't require you to declare your major until your third year. So I basically
Yeah.
floundered and, for the first couple of years trying to figure out what I wanted to study. I had your typical, I think, Asian traditional parents who really nudged me towards engineering. So I explored computer science for a little bit, and then a few classes in, like they asked us to start writing assembly code, and I was like, okay, this really isn't for me. Like tech and computer science is interesting, but I don't love it that much to just make this the only thing I study. I looked, I think, at management science and engineering, so like operations engineering, because I thought that would be practical. But it was a little too just dry for me. And then I was, I think, chatting with somebody on like the balcony of my dorm, a good friend of mine who basically had just gone through the exact same journey as me, a very similar journey of like trying to find out like what he wanted to do and try to marry all these different interests. And told me, you really should look into symbolic systems. I think this is what you're looking for. And it's quite a small program, but it's a pretty impressive alumni once I looked into it. So Marissa Meyer of Google and Yahoo fame was a
Mhm, mhm.
SimSys major. Mike
Right.
Krieger, co-founder of Instagram, actually was my TA in the SimSys program. So I was like, okay, like people who like took this program, like find their passion and are doing well. So let's do this. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So then let's rewind a little bit to you. You made this comment that I really am very curious now. You said that when I asked you the question about your major, you said your mom asked you the same question, right? Was it because like she just couldn't understand what you were studying? Like, am I paying for this education which I have no idea what the output is? Like, was it a typical Asian parent response?
I think so. I think she was concerned. She was like, "Are you sure this is like an actual thing, or are you making this up? Like, is this a real program?" She and I was like, it should be okay, Mom. Like, I'm studying computer science as part of it, but also design was kind of how I described it to her.
Okay. Did the computer science part sort of placate her a little bit, like give her a bit more comfort?
Yeah, a little
Okay,
bit.
yeah, fantastic. Because I had to do the same thing with mine as well. My
Mm.
parents wanted me to do engineering. Obviously, I didn't want
Mm-hmm.
to. So I
Mm-hmm.
pull out the same cards like, hey, I'm doing IT, computer science, it's just it's
Mm-hmm.
technical. It's just not engineering. So, so lots of similarities there.
Yeah.
Okay. So then after you finished studying, you actually went into data, right? You were a data consultant and then you were a data
Mm-hmm.
curator at Unoodle and Quid.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
was that by accident or did you want to go into a data role purposefully?
Um, I think a bit of both, to be honest. Like I had an inkling of what I wanted to do, and I knew I wanted to do something in tech and stay in the Bay Area. And I knew that I wanted to have something to do with product design or like designing products, building things for customers, right? I didn't really have product management as a label in my, in that dictionary of
Yeah.
careers.
But did you know
So
about product management at that time already?
no, no, no,
Okay.
no, no. So like when I graduated and I joined Unoodle, which spun out Quid, I didn't really know about product management. I knew product design existed, but not product management as a discipline or a career. So I think I basically just, I met, the founders of the startup. They said they needed somebody to kind of be a generalist, like look at data, look at product design. I was like, I'm your person. Just take me, so I can learn. And that's where I actually learned about, the existence of like product management as a discipline. Like they had a senior product designer and a product management lead. And so I just shadowed him a lot,
Okay.
and figured out, how it all worked.
Okay. So then let's move on to how you got your first gig into product management. It was for Flipboard, right? How did that happen when you were doing data for Noodle and Quid?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, I'm going to have to thank my network for that, I would say. This was through, I think, a contact, through my Stanford network. And she found out what I was doing at Quid and Unoodle and said, like, hey, we're actually looking for somebody, to kind of do this at Flipboard. We and this would be in product. You'd be a product manager. That's basically what you're doing right now. And I was employee number 25 or 26, so it was quite small when I joined. It was just me and this other person who was the product lead there. Yeah,
Right,
that's
right.
how it happened.
So tell me a little bit more. I mean, this is contextualized to obviously your time at the Bay Area because product management, especially when you're in the Bay Area, everything is ultra competitive in the tech scene. And I'm guessing that product management is no different, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
how did you sort of edge out, other candidates, or rather, well, you won't know that, but rather
Mm-hmm.
like, what do you think made you different that you would get accepted as a product manager? Was it purely the connection, like you were mentioning, or yeah, was it something else that you learned in your time as a
Mm,
data
mm,
consultant?
mm. Yeah, I think if I look back on that time, I think it was, I'm not gonna say that it was all me, right? I think it's a combination, I think, of luck. The company was pretty early stage at the time, so I think they weren't looking for something super specific, right? They
Hmm.
were looking for a generalist, somebody who understood data, somebody who understood design and product and tech, and somebody who's willing to kind of wear many hats.
Hmm.
And I think I had that at the time, right? I was very early in my career. I was like, just throw whatever you want at me, I'll do it and make it happen, right? And like I do know, I know how to handle data. I know how to like handle, I know how to work with engineers and designers. So I had that for me, but I didn't have a ton of experience. So I think it was just like a lot of grit and gusto.
Okay, very nice. Interesting trivia. I still use Flipboard today. It's actually my yeah.
Wow.
I use Flipboard and two other apps
Mm,
for news and yeah, information. Still like it a
very
lot.
cool.
Yeah.
Very
So
cool.
and so you spent a good 3 years there, and since I
Mm-hmm.
still use Flipboard, so here's the question for you: what is the proudest feature or thing that you did for Flipboard in your time at Flipboard?
Oh gosh, it's not even really a feature. It was like, I think something that I pulled off that I'm really proud of. But
Hmm.
if you remember way back when, we weren't available in all the languages, right? We hadn't internationalized and localized. Um, and I think I got a mandate to localize our Android app into 11 languages in a mere couple of weeks,
Oh wow!
to make a launch and to kind of meet a business deal. And I made that happen.
Wow!
From So that was, I think that was a really, really fun exercise in like understanding like, how the inner workings of the app also work, right? Like how do you get an app localized, right? And how do you bring people together? How do you test all of these different things to make sure that they actually don't break the UI? What are the tools that are available to do this? And I was able to really get into the trenches, work with engineering, QA, design, a bunch of local translators. So that was really fun.
Okay, okay,
Yeah.
wow, very interesting. I like that. I like that.
Mhm.
Then let's move on to the next role because you then moved to change.org. And again, this is you've got very interesting roles in very interesting companies, right? Tell us more about that role in change.org because I think at the time that you were there, they hadn't
Mm.
gotten the funding from Reid Hoffman yet. They changed their model. So at the time you were there, they were still would they be considered a non-profit at that time?
No, I think they were never a nonprofit. They were always a B Corp, but I think the model was is quite different then than it was post that funding. Yeah.
Okay, and so how different was that role, being a product manager in a
Mm.
B Corp type company?
Mm.
So for those on the show, a B Corp type company is well, maybe you should explain what a B Corp company is.
Well, I think it's a certification for companies basically who are for-profit companies. But they go through a certification process basically um, uh, that basically validates that they are a social good enterprise or a social good company.
Yes. So no, good thing I asked you to explain. It's a lot better from you. So yes, was it different?
Yeah.
Your role there, working for a company like Change.org?
I think it was, I don't know. It was different in that I think the product culture was quite different between Flipboard and Change.org. I think the way I've described it to other people is that at Flipboard, we were very, I think, design driven, and I think visual design mattered a lot, right?
Yes. Mhm.
I mean, you can tell from the product. Um, and at change.org, I think we were quite a bit more data driven than Flipboard, and didn't spend as much time paying attention to those visual details. Um, and I think I kind of learned the pros and cons of both, right? And operating both ways. Where at Flipboard, I wish we had like used more data to inform some of our decisions. At change.org, I wish, we did it, we used less data to inform certain decisions and actually thought about what the customer needed. And so I think I was able to kind of refine like my point of view through that
Okay.
process.
Do you feel like have listening to what you said about Change.org, would you classify them as a company that is data driven, like very data driven?
When I was there, I would say so. Yeah, we I think the PMs there, myself included, we lived and breathed like mixed panel and experiments, and looking at our funnels every day. We thought about how to move certain metrics, and sometimes at the cost of our customer experience. I think I've made a couple of decisions where we ended up sending even more emails to customers. Looking back, I was like, we probably didn't need to, but then those brought in like the numbers and the clicks and the conversions we wanted to see in the data, right?
Mhm.
But overall, I think that contributed to a poorer customer experience in the long run.
Mhm, mhm. Well, I think I would ask this question now, even though I kind of was thinking of asking it a little bit later.
Mm,
And this isn't specific to change.org. But
mm,
speaking about product, sorry, companies that are very data driven,
mhm.
and as what you mentioned, how do you think product managers or product leaders should balance that fine line, like you were mentioning, being data driven, but at the same time,
Mm.
not giving up, the user experience such that it becomes really crappy.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think I've refined this a bit at Gojek and learned a little bit of this at Gojek and my previous company is one, I think having strong principles around what to do and what not to do, right? When you're thinking about what you're building for your customers. For example, I think we're actually introducing, company-wide product principles for the first time in the next few weeks, actually, where I'm refining some copy. But for example, one of the principles is something like, we value our customers' time, or we don't waste our customers' time. So when you think about what you're doing, we're thinking about how do we build frictionless experiences, right? That matters. That should be front of mind. How do we avoid engaging our customers for the sake of engagement, because we don't want to distract them, right? We actually want them to come in and like get what they want to do done, and not distract them from like what actually matters. So things like that I think are really important. So like when you have product principles or like any kind of principles and values front and center, I think they help guide you decision making. um, and then two, I think if you find yourself in a really, I think, quantitative environment, which I think Gojek is pretty, uh, a pretty quant driven, I think, product environment. thinking about how do you actually quantify some customer experiences, right? How do you measure that? I'm in the middle of doing that right now. How do we quantify that a little better? How do we tie that to like metrics that people are maybe more familiar with already, right? Like conversions, other business metrics, and can we correlate that, right? And sometimes, I hope that I only have to do this a few times and kind of show that there is value and not have to keep correlating that, because there is value, right? And like making sure that we're paying attention to the customer experience.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. If we have time, I'll probably round back to that because I have a few more. What you've mentioned has triggered some other questions. But we'll come back to that. So,
Okay.
yeah, because I want to get to the Gojek part, but before that, I also want to stop at Off-Grid Electric, where you were the senior product manager there.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm very curious about this is you were managing the software part of Off-Grid Electric, but their primary market was Africa. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
And you were based out of the US?
We had our headquarters was in Arusha, Tanzania, and we had a small office for the hardware and software team in San Francisco, and we traveled a lot.
To Tanzania?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So tell me a bit more about that. I'm always interested when there is a company where people work in the Bay Area, but the product is not in the Bay Area. Because that's fascinating.
Yeah, it was a very intentionally distributed, I think, company, and I think my time there has really helped me like be ready for the current environment that we're in. So I'll start with just like the team, right? So you had a few PMs in San Francisco. We actually had the data team was actually in Arusha, Tanzania, with all the regional ops teams, sales teams, service teams. We had the hardware team in San Francisco. Our software engineers, none of them were in the San Francisco office. So my director of engineering and my peer was he was in Colorado. We had a couple other engineers in Colorado. It's in a different state, right? Different time zone even. They're an hour ahead, I believe. And we had several engineers in Russia. We had engineers in Africa, in Washington, D.C., Pennsylvania. Wow. So it was very intentional, I think. I think before I joined, they had said, we're going to make this distributed and remote, and we're going to invest in making it work.
But so here's the question that I'm very curious about, because usually for product managers, they tend to want them to be close to it's usually one extreme or the other, as in they want them to be very close to the business. So I want you to sit in the head office, right? So that's where all the big business decisions get made. Or they tend to want them to sit very close to the engineering teams, especially if they're not in the same location. But in your case, you were literally in the middle of everything, but not close enough to everything. How did you product manage, engineers in different time zones, your peers and your bosses in a different country and time zone as well?
I think we got really good at setting up the right communication structures and like the right cadences. So I had, the software like PMs establish like a really strong relationship with the various operational and functional leads that sit in Africa, right? So, for example, I was overseeing like the kind of all the software and services related to our service organization. So everything from like, our tools for the call center, our app for our field service agents. That was like something I was looking at. I was also looking at the tools for like our last mile and logistics area. And so we had operational and business counterparts there. And so we had to like basically be, joined at the hip, right? There's another product manager who's focusing more on like sales products, right? The apps for like the sales agents, thinking through like how these field agents are selling to customers and what we're building for them. He was attached to the hip to our sales leader in Tanzania. So, and we did a lot of travel, right? We'd spend, actually like some of the PMs will spend like 6 months at a time there. I've been there for up to 3 months. Brought my husband with me so that we could stay that long. And with engineering, I think with engineering it's actually a little easier. I think it's harder to really understand and remember customer pain and what the challenges are unless you are experiencing them or sitting next to a call center agent kind of listening through some of the challenges. So for me it was more important to focus on that side of things, and the engineering pieces we were able to manage pretty easily.
Okay. Yep. So yeah, I think the travel there for a prolonged period definitely helped to, bring up your understanding of the local scene. At the same time as well, an appreciation for what you guys are doing as well, right? Seeing it on the ground.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but the question I forgot to ask you about Zola Electric was, what made you join them?
A couple of different things. I think since I joined, since change.org, I think I kind of said to myself, I made a personal commitment that any other company I joined after that needed to have some element of a social, mission. I needed to feel like I was contributing something that made the world a better place. And I was actually about to sign an offer with a different company where I was excited about the team, and I was very excited about the product challenges, but it didn't really tick that box. So I was like, oh man, I'm about to go back on my own commitment. And then right before I signed that offer, a friend of a friend said, hey, this company is looking for someone that sounds exactly like you. And
it's got your name on it.
It's you really should talk to the hiring manager. And I was literally I think on my way to Mexico for a vacation, took the first couple of phone screens over Zoom in Mexico. And then realized that I needed to explore this because of their mission and the impact they were having. And honestly, Thor, if you're listening, I really wanted to work for you. My boss and hiring manager was very inspiring, and I really wanted to work with him.
His name is Thor?
His name is Thor.
Damn, we need to talk about his hammer, man. So I'm sorry, but that was too good an opportunity to let up. Yeah, all right. So you're saying that you wanted to sort of join companies with a sort of a mission that made it a better place. How did that lead from Zola to then Gojek?
I mean, that's Gojek. There's I think a clear social impact. It was also a deeply personal decision for me. I should start right because I did want to be closer to my family in Indonesia. I really wanted to experience, I think, what it was like to work at a tech company in my own home country. And before the last few years, there weren't really any opportunities to do that, right? Until the tech scene sort of started really growing the last few years. So I was excited to return and do that. But yeah, for Gojek, I think our impact isn't just on customers, right? When you think about the lives of the drivers and the merchants and the opportunities we unlock, the impact we've had on the Indonesian economy, the mission we have, I think, around financial inclusion, on our GoPay arm. When I spoke to the folks at Gojek, I think it was very clear that we weren't doing this just to make our customers' lives easier. We were doing this because we wanted to create an ecosystem where we were unlocking new opportunities for what tended to be the underdogs and people who might be overlooked otherwise.
Okay, very nice. And you said that it was a deeply personal decision because you wanted to work in a tech company that was from your home country, and you're still in the US. So the curious question that I want to just clarify is the long-term plan for you to move back to Jakarta?
Yes, we've been actually, so since I joined Gojek in 2018, I've spent about half of my time in Jakarta and half my time in California, where my husband and my cat are. And we were actually making plans to be fully relocated to Jakarta, as of right now, before 2020 happened.
Yes, before this just small thing called COVID happened, right?
Yeah, so that was always the long-term plan. So it was going to be a 1-2 year process to make sure that, my husband could wrap up his work here
Mm-hmm.
before we relocated. So yeah, that is the plan.
Okay. And so when you moved to Gojek, or rather, sorry, let me pull it back maybe one step. How did Gojek get in touch with you? How did you get in touch with Gojek? And like who looked for who?
It was a bit of both. It goes back actually quite a few years. So I think starting 2008 or 2009, I started paying attention to what was happening in tech in Indonesia, right? And
Mhm.
met a few people in the community, stayed in touch with them. Um, Kevin, our co-CEO, actually, I knew him from, through a different network. He was also in California, and many years before he became the co-founder and CEO of Gojek, he was not in tech, and he was actually looking to explore the tech scene in Indonesia before moving back there from California. So I made that connection and stayed in touch with him. I introduced him to some of like my community there in Indonesia who I knew. And then we stayed in touch when he kind of like, started his journey with Gojek, and he had questions about, what should I care about when I like, structure like my product teams? Like, what do you think about this? Do you want to check out our app? What do you think? And we just kind of stayed in touch over the years until at one point they had really grown, and I was like, what am I doing? Why am I just like talking to them instead of actually trying to work for them, right? So yeah, went through like the process of interviewing with Gojek and landed there in 2018. So it was like, I don't know if we just found each other a long time ago, maybe.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, at least you already had, sort of had contact with them. You kept in touch. So it's not to say you came in totally clueless, right? So you already knew
Yeah.
the co-founder anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, and your role in Gojek is your first senior leadership role.
Hmm.
How easy or difficult has that been? That transition, because it's not just and I asked this of a lot of other people on the show as well, because
Uh-huh.
in many cases most of you are not just going into a new role, it's also
Hmm.
usually a new country.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I'm always
Hmm.
curious to know how easy or difficult was it.
It's one of the hardest things I've ever done. I'll be honest, like it's definitely a big stretch for me. It's the biggest team I've ever like worked with, biggest company I've ever worked with. I've never seen the scale before Gojek. Everything that I have solved before takes on a different flavor when you're trying to solve the same problem at the scale, right? And sometimes, I ask myself and I ask Kevin, man, maybe I should have like joined a couple years earlier when, we had the same similar problems, but at a much smaller scale. I would have been able to solve it quicker, right? The scale changes everything, I think, because we have, when I joined, it was 80 PMs, I think.
Mhm.
And now we're 130, 140 product managers. It's big.
I know, it's crazy. I mean, just hearing that number, 130 product managers, it's insane. That it's bigger than some companies. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So what were the most difficult parts of what you had to learn? Because like you're saying, it was a stretch, but
Mm-hmm.
if you can tell us a little bit more about what were the things that you really had to like learn on the fly, like what did you have to hit the ground running doing, and what were the things that you had
Mm.
to, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore, I have to start doing this.
Mm. I think one of the hardest things for me is actually feeling like I couldn't have as much direct impact on like products, right? I was like a few layers removed and really focused on the organization for the first like year and a half. We had to put in a lot of structures around how do we hire product managers, right? That had not been set in place when I joined. How do we evaluate product managers? What is the JD for product managers? That is still evolving, I think, even today, right? I think if you ask any product leader, that continues to evolve. Um, so I think spending a lot of time doing that and feeling a little like removed from the actual product and the actual customers was one of the harder things for me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Did you get with withdrawal symptoms?
A little bit. A little bit. I got withdrawal. I got a bit of FOMO. I got a bit of like imposter syndrome. I was like, is this the right thing to be focusing on? Like, I feel like I'm not doing anything for the customer right now, right? So is this the right thing? Thankfully, I think, now that that's a bit more settled, I can actually, so like my focus right now is product operations, right? And I think it fits well with like my current location and being stuck in California because being at a different time zone, this type of work I think is a bit more uh, forgiving for the time zone and being 15 hours behind everybody else. But thinking about how do we become more customer centric as a company, right? What are some of the frameworks and principles we want to operate by? And so thinking about that at scale and knowing that maybe I'm not directly impacting any one product, but like how do I actually, help steer the organization towards that?
Wow, very, very, very insightful. And so, moving in that same direction, right?
Yeah.
What did you do to sort of sense check yourself in that sense? Like, because you were saying the imposter syndrome, asking the question, is this the right thing? What did you do, or how did you manage that to know that, was it just jump and hope it all, works? Or I've read, Marty Kagan said 1, 2, 3, I'm doing 1, 2, 3, right? So.
Great question. I think I kind of treated like the product management org like a product, right? Like I was PMing the PM org, so to speak. So I had to make sure I had like OKRs and like some metrics, quantitative metrics, qualitative metrics. I measured, we've had an ongoing survey since since I joined that we've been sending the team. And so we check on, it's kind of like a more specific kind of like employee engagement survey that's specifically for like product manager problems, right? So like, do you feel that you actually understand your role? Do you feel that like your work, you feel connected to the company vision? You understand how your product is contributing? Questions like that, right? And kind of tracking the trend over time. And we're trending positively. So I think we're doing something right.
Well, you must be.
There's still a lot, I think, to solve. And but I think, I think we're on the right track.
Nice. And also, again, I'm going to have to really keep pushing a little bit more about this because I think that's the really interesting part about your career. When you decided to join Gojek, was it like, did you fly back to Indonesia to get unveiled in that sense? And also, yeah, sounds a little bit strange, but anyway, how did you build up the credibility, right? Because you when you joined, you said there were like what, 80 product managers, and so they're probably trying to figure out who you are. You're trying to figure out who they are. How do you say that? Hey, I'm kind of the person leading the team, but at the same time, you don't want to do it like like a draconian Nazi dictator, right? So,
yeah,
I guess.
I'll just take it from like your typical product manager playbook again, which is to like try to actually solve the customer's problem, right? And treating like the organization like a customer and not jumping to solutions, but really spending time to discover what are the problems and the pain points. I think my first two months or so, 3 months even, was just a lot of listening and meeting and collecting data, getting that baseline survey out, spending a lot of one-on-one time with people, not just PMs, but like our stakeholders, designers, researchers, engineers. And that was, that led to kind of prioritizing the two areas that we did for the first like 6 to 12 months. Like, how do we make sure that PMs feel like they have a career path, that have some clarity in their job description? And how do we make sure that we are hiring the right people and have like a standard for hiring, right? Because that didn't exist at the time. Does that answer your question?
And what about cultural differences between what you were doing, because obviously you were working for technically off grid was Tanzania based. But anyway,
Mm-hmm.
the culture when you joined Gojek, how different was it? How difficult was it to adjust as well?
Mm-hmm. Um, I think there was definitely a bit of an adjustment. First of all, something really simple. I hadn't been speaking Indonesian day to day for a really long time. I mean, it's my first language, but when I landed there and like I was trying to like give like a Gojek driver directions to my mom's house, the house I grew up in, and like I couldn't. I was like fumbling with my words, and I was like, what's happening? I've lost my vocabulary. So I think that took some time to get used to, just being able
Hmm.
to actually feel like I could credibly speak in a professional setting in my own language.
Mm.
Um, and then I think really balancing, I had gotten used to just being like extremely candid in public forums, right? And really kind of checking myself and kind of checking, okay, like, is this are is this something that we are used to as an organization yet, or like, do we still prefer to discuss certain things, more privately? Um, there are some cultural nuances and religious, I think, nuances of, like some people will not want to shake hands with me, for example, right? Because
Yes,
I'm a
yes.
woman. And like I had a very awkward moment with somebody where I was like kind of just shoving my hand in there in front of them. I was like, oh, you really don't want to shake my hand, and you don't really want to decline. You don't want to decline that either because you don't want to seem impolite. So I think those nuances I had to like get used to again, but overall it wasn't a very hard adjustment.
Okay,
Yeah.
from a cultural perspective, it was a lot easier. It sounds like you had to sort of rediscover where the nuances of growing up in Indonesia.
Yeah, it helps. I think it really helps a lot that I grew up there and I speak the language.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And this is just a very curious question. For those of you who watched some of the other episodes, I also interviewed the VP of Product for Bukalapak, and it was very
Yeah.
interesting to hear Hendro's story about
Yeah.
how he had to sort of bridge the language barrier. It was one of the things that he
Yeah.
highlighted as something tough.
Uh,
And so the curious question for you is, did you have to also sort of learn Bahasa Indonesia now as the primary language of communication with people, not just officially, but even in
mm,
day-to-day interaction with your
mm.
team?
Day-to-day interaction is a lot easier for me. I think what I had to kind of learn a little bit more was, when like speaking in public in Indonesian, or just speaking in a more like professional setting. Like I didn't, this was something I'd never done before, right? This is my first job in Indonesia.
Hmm.
That said, I think it's a little bit easier for me than it was for Hendro, probably because half of our product and engineering teams are in uh, Bangalore, India.
Okay.
And we have a team also in Singapore. So I think as a whole, like at least all the product and tech teams, we have to use English, when we're kind of interacting across offices, because that
Right.
is the unifying language.
Hmm.
So but as soon as I'm in a meeting with only Indonesians, we switch back to Indonesian, and I'm comfortable doing that now, thankfully.
Hmm. Okay. You mentioned something about cultural nuances, and then suddenly I'm triggered to ask as well. How how do you think perception was for someone like you? And I'll qualify what I mean by someone like you in a bit, because I know it sounds weird. When you went back there, because obviously, like, so context. Like you're the kind of person I think who wears her heart on her sleeve, right? I can see your tats. Every time I see you, your hair is a different color. And back, I mean, I'm sure in the States, nobody bats an eyelid, right? But you're going
Mm-hmm.
back to Indonesia where, like you just mentioned, right, there's some nuances, like even simple things that we take for granted, like shaking hands.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that actually had an impact for you? Did you find that you had to, yeah, change a little bit, or was it just waiting for time to normalize?
That's a good question. It might be that I'm like not as sensitive to that, if like that got in my way, or like um I think definitely, having my hair colored and like having tattoos would draw some stares. And I don't know if like I'm always maybe taken seriously in certain contexts, right? So I do wonder about that sometimes. But overall, I think the culture has been like pretty accepting of that. I don't think it's gotten in my way of like getting things done or like any perception of me. I hope not. I really hope not. Um,
Well, if you've not felt it, then I'm guessing it's been good so far, right?
yeah. Yeah, I think it's a pretty progressive, I think, company overall. And like, I'm always professional and I think my work speaks for itself. So I was like, yeah, I have tattoos and some of them are actually like ugly and I don't like them. But here we are,
It's time
right?
to ink over. It's time to ink over. Put the Gojek logo there and you'll be fine.
I mean, I love Gojek. I don't know if, I love it that much.
Yeah. All right. All right. And so if let's say people on the show are listening and are watching and they're trying or they're in the process of becoming product leaders themselves, joining the biggest company they've ever joined, biggest product team they've ever led, what will be your advice for them to do it well?
Mm-hmm. Um, well, you're not alone. And I know probably a lot of people will say find yourself like a mentor or somebody who knows what you're going through. But actually, I think what really helped me is find a couple people you can really trust to help you execute on your vision, right? Um, like if you were to find an extension of yourself, right, and you wanted a partner to execute on what you wanted to do at an unfamiliar place, you want to make sure that you either like find somebody you already trust or like quickly find somebody at the company, form that trust and execute together. So an execution partner, I think, is pretty critical, and I was able to do that at Gojek, and I'm very thankful for those folks.
Okay. So just make sure you find two lieutenants and then you're good to go.
It helps a lot.
Okay. Okay. And also now because you've been with Gojek since 2018, you've
Mm-hmm.
obviously grown with the company along with the
Mm-hmm.
team size and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. And
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned that Gojek has offices in India, in Singapore. There's one other location that Gojek has offices in, right? But I can't remember. But anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, India, I think we have like a second office in Gurgaon. Yeah,
Okay. All right.
near
Yeah.
Delhi. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's obviously three different locations, and like you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, right? It hasn't really hampered communication, delivery, creating value too much
Mm-hmm.
because you've put in processes in place. And I believe your talk during the MTP as well touched on that, which by the way was a really good talk. Uh,
Thanks.
so the question that I'm thinking is for the future of product management. Well, maybe let's zoom it into maybe Southeast Asia, products that are based in Southeast Asia or Asia for that matter, right? Do you think we could go fully remote? Because now you've really got offices all over the place, and remote is literally just one step further. You've done it with off grid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what are your thoughts on that?
I think my thoughts will reflect what I mentioned to you earlier, which is I think the the trick is to figure out a way that your builders are still you know in touch with like the customers, right?
Hmm.
So either through making sure that they have some you know physical touch points, right, to that experience, or having a very robust processes to make sure that that empathy isn't lost when you're not there. And we don't have that perfect yet here at Gojek, but we really strive to kind of do that because we know that like half of our builders are in a different market and can't use our product every day, right?
Yeah.
So all of our researchers, for example, like are in market, right? None of
Hmm.
them are actually in India.
Yeah.
And that I think, making sure that you have kind of that that you maintain that connection and figure out how do you scale that empathy, I think is really important. But otherwise, I think, one can work from anywhere.
Hmm. Yeah, but if let's say let's use the example of, let's say, off grid as the
Yeah.
reference point, right? The
Yeah.
time zone differences is usually the factor that a lot of people say why product managers can't work remotely, because obviously the overheads of communication and things like that are very high, and yet your experience in off grid and a lot of other people, a growing number of people, have also proven that you can do it remotely even with time zone differences. And probably, I guess now would be even better because now you're in California, and obviously, Gojek is in Jakarta, right? In that sense. So
Yeah.
how would you say, product managers in these kinds of scenarios get better at what they're doing without sacrificing too much of the quality of being in person?
I'm trying to like draw on specific things that I do. I think you have to get really good at asynchronous communications. I think that was one of the first things I had to just get used to mentally. Also, from change.org, I could just kind of turn around and talk to my tech lead, to kind of problem solve something. And I couldn't, and if I didn't have my stuff together, that meant we lost 11 to 15 hours before I got my answer, right? So I think being a lot more intentional about how you want to spend your time and prioritize your tasks and in what order you need to kind of prep them so that you can have them, if you need feedback from somebody that's in a different time zone, being very specific about what you need, making sure you have everything prepped so that when you kind of dump it on their plate and you go to bed for 8 hours, that they have everything that they need to kind of give you the feedback or deliverable that you're asking for, right? So I think that's probably one of the things that I really have refined over the last couple of years in terms of ways of working, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So let's talk about getting better at asynchronous communication, because usually that's the priority numero uno. Do you have any tips on what anyone can do, or any product leader or team, to get better at asynchronous communication? Any specific things that you do that works?
Yeah. I can start with tools. We live and die by Asana here at Gojek. Everything that requires attention or a deliverable or an update is now migrating to Asana. And so having a shared tool is really helpful. I think clear roles and decision makers on any kind of discussion or question is really important. So instead of, when you're async and you're not sure what the decision tree is and who the final decision maker is, then that has a potential to just kind of go on for a really long time. Whereas if you're clear, okay, for this decision, here's who we need to, for any decision in this project, for example, here are the people you need to involve. Here's the person who's accountable for driving decisions. When we get stuck, here's the person who has a final say and has veto rights, and here are the people you should consult, and here are the people who don't need to be consulted, but you should probably just inform as key decisions arise. We call that I think we use the Darcy model. Other people use RACI. Yeah. So I think that's been really important in a lot of our asynchronous discussions.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to ask you a very. This is another one of those questions that I've wanted to ask you, and now suddenly they mentioned it. I can ask you. You were saying that everyone in Gojek is moving to Asana.
Yeah.
And obviously, Jira is the darling in this space. Why didn't you use Jira instead of Asana?
We're still using both. Yay. Got you there. Everything that has to do, I think, with software development still lives in Jira, but for us to manage all of our non-technical stakeholders, we use Asana. So all our program managers use that when we want to communicate with business stakeholders. We use Asana. Those are, tied to specific Jira epics where necessary, so that, they're integrated. So we use both. Yeah, we did not get rid of Jira.
Okay. So I like how much glee you said. Oh, yes, we're still getting Jira. So Yeah. So Asana for like, is it like, would I say company wide?
We're getting there. Yeah, that's
Okay.
yeah.
And Jira is for tech.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Very interesting. And what is the thinking around, why not stick with Jira and, just use it? Because obviously Jira has tools even
Mm-hmm.
for, decision
Mm-hmm.
making, presenting to non-technical stakeholders,
Yep.
la di da, la di da. Yeah.
Definitely. There's a couple of like program managers assigned to this because it's, an epic effort to kind of standardize a
Hmm.
company of
Hmm.
this size to two tools when we
I
had
can understand.
dozens. We had
Yeah.
dozens that everybody was using. We were using like Favro and Trello and Rike and everything. So there was a process by which we decided this is why we're going to select these two.
Okay.
And I think for like I'm not speaking for everybody, but for
Hmm.
me, Jira, I think is highly configurable, but
Yes.
I think has a lot of like upfront costs for configuring the right thing. And
Yeah.
for most of the company and most of our needs, we just needed, a much, a lighter collaboration
Mm.
tool, and
Mm.
Asana met those needs.
Yeah, and I think Asana has that portfolio vertical view that is quite cool as well, right? So
Yeah. We use that for our OKRs now. We
okay.
even we even use Asana for our meeting logs, because instead of recording like your one-on-one notes or your team meeting notes in a Google Doc, for example, you do that in Asana. We set up the agenda and the queue in there. We pull them into, sections, and then as you come up with action items, you just assign them in line, and you can see them all in context, which is pretty great.
Yeah, that is like that's a really good tip, I think.
Yeah,
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 because I can still remember, the difficulties of having, Jira and then Google Docs and, just trying to mishmash between the two and then people
yeah.
using Evernote and sharing it across the
Oh no. Oh no.
yeah, all
I'm
the
cringing.
but we'll leave that for now. Let sleeping dogs lie.
Yeah.
Okay. The next thing that I wanted to sort of explore with you a little bit is female leadership in Southeast Asia with regards
Hmm.
to product in specific.
Yeah.
Mainly because, again, it comes back to earlier we were talking about, cultural nuances and differences. How easy or difficult has it been for you to settle down in your role as a product leader who is female
Hmm.
in Southeast
Hmm.
Asia?
Hmm. Um, Great question. I think in terms of settling down into the role, I think the hardest part for me is not seeing other leaders who look like me. My peers are almost entirely men. And my peers also are almost entirely not Indonesian. So I think it's not just gender diversity, but how do we get more Indonesian representation for like product leadership where the
Mm,
primary market is Indonesian, right? So how do we grow that? So I think that's my biggest challenge, and I think figuring out ways to like systematically address, I think um, our challenges in diversity. That's been like my personal challenge and priority, and I think also priority for leadership at Gojek,
mhm.
increasingly so. Hmm.
Okay. And do you have any advice? Well, yeah, maybe, yeah, or tips or ideas? Yeah, ideas is the word I'm looking for about
Uh-huh.
how product leaders across Southeast Asia. So it's not just, specific to
Hmm.
Gojek, but this is in
Hmm.
general. How do we increase the diversity or get better at being inclusive at the things that we do within
Hmm.
product? Yeah.
Hmm. Um, a few things. I think the first is, I think when I think about like what leverage do I have in this issue, right? So I think about how do we hold our leaders accountable? How do we make other leaders see that this is something that is important and something that isn't like a special issue, but like this should be business as usual, right? How do we get diversity metrics represented at company level objectives and
Mm,
OKRs so that we can hold teams accountable to it versus just talking about it, right?
yeah.
So I think that's one. Two, I think being really mindful, I think, of unconscious biases and like just being mindful of like how some of these aren't like in your face, but might feel um, make underrepresented groups feel not included, or feel like they don't belong. Paying attention to that and creating, I think, community like safe spaces for people to discuss that. So, for example, I think for the product management organization, we have a couple of discussion channels where we can share a bit more freely and feel like we can support each other in that forum. And then third, it's not just hiring, but retaining people and like thinking about what do they need to feel like they're supported, right? What are like looking at metrics like promotions and growth paths for like women, right? How do we make sure that those underrepresented groups have paths and upward mobility? Look at benefits that that specific groups might care about. For example, like parental benefits, health benefits, like Gojek health benefits in Indonesia. I think as married women, like we get to receive benefits as a primary provider, and not like a dependent, which has not always been the case. I think the default in Indonesia is that if you're a married woman, you are assumed a dependent, and you don't actually automatically get like benefits.
Okay.
So I think we've turned that around to say like, actually, yeah, you're eligible for benefits even though you're a married woman, because you actually might be the primary, provider in your household and your spouse is a dependent. So that was really important to me because my husband is a freelancer, right? And if that wasn't the case, that would be something I would consider and like say like maybe this isn't a company I want to join, right?
Yeah.
So,
Fantastic. Yeah, very
does that make
great.
sense?
Great. It does. It does. And I like how, you've put it into examples as well, because that really helps contextualize the answer. One more question about your time in Gojek as well. So it was big news in Indonesia when Nadim decided to join the government. So there was like a big change in senior leadership. It's not even senior. This is at the very top. It's not even senior. It's like the top management. How was that transition for you? And how did that change your workings with the product team, or was there no change at all actually?
I think there are some changes, and his, Nadim's presence is very much missed. I think he was often actually, he's a huge advocate and proponent of like the customer voice. He was often like that voice kind of reminding us, is this good for the customer? Like, why is this experience terrible? Is anybody looking at it? Like, he was kind of that sponsor at the executive level. And so we were worried about that, I think, when he was departing. We talked about that, right? How do we make sure that this attention to our customer is retained and cultivated, even if Nadim isn't there to kind of be that strongest voice in the room. But I think it was a very mindful and thoughtfully executed transition. I think Nadim prepared like the executive team well for it, and like very slowly and mindfully kind of removed himself from like certain like forums and decision making, and inserted like other leaders in his place. And this happened over a pretty long period of time, right? It didn't happen overnight. So by the time he actually exited, it felt quite smooth, at least in my perspective.
Okay. So that wasn't. I mean, it was manageable, the change in that sense for the product team.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We come to the last part of the show, which is the song. And this is always my favorite part of the show because I always get very perplexed looks and comments about, why would you put me through this? I mean, they don't say it, right? But I can see it in their eyes. So yes, true. I know. And I know that, yes, I definitely put you in the spot by asking you about this. So yes, tell us about the song that you chose.
I chose the Beatles. And I think I told you in my email, I was like, I feel like I'm just like not cool enough to share any recent songs. So I'm just going to go for a classic, band.
Well, for the record, the Beatles are cool. They were cool and they still are cool now. So, people who say Beatles are not cool, well, too bad. You obviously have no taste, but
I agree. Well, I mean, it was hard to pick a song even, right? And I feel like there's like a Beatles song for like almost any occasion. My husband and I actually walked down the aisle to a Beatles song.
Was
But
it
both
this
of us,
particular song?
oh God, no.
It's like, wow, this is a really, yeah, okay, not this song. Okay.
No, I think we did Here, There, and Everywhere. It was a
Okay.
very sweet song. But I love the Beatles. He loves the Beatles. He grew up around the Beatles. I had to sneak in the Beatles because, my parents did not approve. But hey, mom, it's good. It's really good music. But this particular one, I discovered actually not till college, probably through one of my really close friends in college. And I don't know, it was probably like really late at night. And I think we were just like dancing around the dorm. And it just kind of brings back a lot of really good memories when I hear this. Takes
Yeah,
me
but
back
it's
to those days.
it's quite an interesting song to dance to, right? Because they're like signature time changes and tempo changes. So yeah, it's a little bit strange. Yeah. Oh, by the way, I just realized we haven't mentioned the title of the song. I think it's "Happiness Is a Warm Gun" by the
Correct.
Beatles, and the link will be up here somewhere. So
Mm-hmm.
go take a listen, especially for any one of you who hasn't listened to the song, and especially if you don't know the Beatles, you need to question your existence in product management in Southeast Asia. Well, your existence in general. So there you go. And by the way, you're not the first person to recommend like a really old song in that sense. Well, they're evergreen, right? Because
Yeah.
I think Hendro was the one who actually he suggested a song by Frank Sinatra. So he's a Sinatra fan.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's really nice.
yeah. So that's really really good. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show. I know I've said it many
Of course.
times, and it's been really exciting and interesting conversation. So before we go, is there any product management principles or sage words of wisdom that you would like to leave with our listeners and viewers?
I don't know if I would call it sage, but this has been on my mind lately, and I think this is something that's really important to um, product leaders at Gojek. And this is a phrase that has stuck with us, I think, recently, is to remember that what's good for the customer is good for the business. Don't forget that.
Oh, fantastic. Lovely words. So, ladies, gentlemen, boys, girls, and everyone in between of the spectrum, that was Dian Rosanti. She's the SVP of Product Management at Gojek, and want to thank her very much for being on the show. As you can see from all our sessions, that product management in Southeast Asia is exciting. It's interesting and it's growing, and I will be excited to bring you the next episode as soon as I can. So take care, see you, and bye bye.